200,000 players. That is the peak of Type Soul. Type Soul was able to go all the way from 200,000 players to 0, re-released 3 times. Each time the re-release had a huge update, and yet today, we only have the content from 2 big patches ago, with an entire update being completely removed, and the player count today is just 400. Less than Rogue Lineage, and that game hasn't been seriously updated in years. Type Soul is the worst case of wasted potential on all of Roblox. They can build the hype, they can build the player base, but they can't keep it, and every update that comes out only proves that no matter what big update they add, they can't manage a proper player base properly. In today's video, I'm talking about Type Soul's wasted potential and why the game always ends up dying despite the hype that it's able to generate, and the various errors it had, as well as what the development team did wrong, which keeps causing the game to die after every update. If you enjoy, make sure to subscribe, since basically nobody is. And along with that, I have a new video song cover up posted for YouTube members, so buy any tier membership if you guys want to hear my songs. I drop a new one every month, and I'm actually dropping 2 this month because, I kind of missed last month's because my power went out pretty recently due to the heat waves. But let's get straight into it. Type Soul first came out in the summer of 2023, and back then had a concurrent player high of 11,000 players. The biggest difference from Type Soul then and now was the Bankai and Resurrection obtainment. Back then, after it was nerfed in pre-release, it took 175 raid wins to be able to get your Resurrection, Bankai, or Volsternlich, which was down from 225. This was something a vast majority of the player base didn't do due to the high requirements, but given how strong modes were back then, it was understandable. The devs didn't want everyone going around one-shotting people in mode. Honestly though, it wasn't nearly as hard as people made it out to be, because I actually got it done in about 2 or 3 days. The game eventually died due to a lack of updates, as well as the controversy surrounding the developers, which led them to leaving the game entirely. At this point in time, the development team's old lead scripter also got mad and decided to leak the entire game's code and assets, resulting in hundreds of Type Soul copy games being released. The funny thing about this though is that all the Type Soul copy games that were re-released had to be re-scripted because the game's spaghetti code got leaked, and it was so bad that when it was put into another place one for one, it just wouldn't work for some reason. Eventually, Type Soul would be temporarily shut down amidst all the chaos, closing entirely and announcing they'd be working on big updates while the game would close, and that they would eventually re-release. Then in April and all the way till August of 2025, the game averaged well over 30,000 players, with it often being up to 40,000, with a peak of 65,000 in July after having their first massive re-release on March 30th of 2023. This re-release came with tons of changes. First of all, Bankai and the modes like Resurrection or Volsternlich became way easier to obtain, going from 175 raid wins to just 10, making the first stage of Bankai obtainment basically free, and the rest of them weren't really that hard anyway. Along with that, most of them were nerfed to compensate, and then they would add stuff like the ranked arena for PvP, which was a crazy good way to earn items at the time and money, like skill boxes and Hogyoku fragments, and just thousands and thousands of yen, or whatever the currency's called in this game. But the worst thing to come out of this update was boss raids. Type Soul's development team thought that the reason why Deepwoken had longevity and Type Soul didn't was because of the PvE making the game replayable. But the problem with that is Type Soul's combat wasn't made for PvE. All the bosses were extremely poorly designed. They would kind of just spam their moves with no cooldown, and you had to cycle out with your friends and a healer, and it was just the most boring shit ever. This is a PvP game, and for so long they tried to branch out into PvE without making mechanics unique for it, and it never worked. It never worked. Boss raids was a terrible idea. They hid the best equipment in the game behind a bad PvE game mode nobody wanted to play. Boss raids were supposed to add longevity to the game by making people have to grind out PvE events to get the gear that they wanted, and making it all untradeable so people were forced to play it for the gear they needed. But if you wanted to force people to play a part of your game, maybe it isn't a good part of your game, and maybe it shouldn't be in your game, right? The entire point of the boss raids, as far as a development design perspective, was pretty much just to draw out the game for a longer period of time that people would play it for, because everyone wanted to have the best gear possible so they were competitively viable in PvP, but in order to do that, you had to fight 10 different bosses 3 times each to get the items you wanted. And if you got unlucky and you didn't have like the luck potion, which by the way, this is just another way to make money, they sold luck potions for the PvE boss raids, and I was like, yeah, you gotta buy the PvE boss raid luck potion to get the items you want. What a development team. The game ended up dying again in September before being briefly revived with the new map and Battle Royale mode in October, which was when the whole Battle Royale CC content creator tournament I was in, which I streamed, actually happened. That event was actually pretty fun despite how poorly it went. which, by the way, I still got snubbed. I should have gotten first. But the game was going under a lot of weird changes at this time. The entire Katakura Town map was revamped to look like Tokyo, and it was very poorly optimized, confusing, too large, and also just wasn't designed very well because there were certain gaps in the map and parts that you could just get stuck in because you can't really jump that high. The game was undergoing a very weird identity crisis at this time, and because of that, it ended up dying again and got shut down once more in December, the longest time period of any of the shutdowns, which was to prepare for the re-release introducing the massive Hellverse update. Now, the Hellverse update was supposed to have massive PvP and PvE content additions, a whole new realm to explore, and then you'd also be able to get your true mode, which was essentially reverting the mode nerfs that they had back in the first re-release, which would bring them back to the point where they were just used to one-shot people, and the true modes were crazy strong and super unbalanced, but it looked super cool, right? Now, this was crazy. This update generated major hype because it was also based on Bleach's Hell arc, which to this day isn't even out yet. They were updating their game based on content that doesn't even exist yet, and that was insane. People wanted to see what the Hell arc was like. They're like, whoa, Type Soul's making the Bleach Hell arc? I want to see what Bleach Hell is like, because Bleach Hell doesn't exist yet. So people wanted to see this interpretation of the Hell arc. So upon release day, the game peaked at nearly 200,000 players, with 187,500 people concurrently on Type Soul on release day, and the game was broken. To this day, the biggest Bleach game on Roblox, and it was broken. You couldn't join the game properly, you couldn't load in properly, tons of people's data, including mine, got wiped, so all of my accessories got wiped. It was really, really bad. So, there's only one question to ask. How did they fuck it up? 200,000 players. How could they have possibly dropped that many players? Maybe some of them would have stayed after they fixed some of the bugs and issues, right? Hell itself was a mess. It felt like a bunch of loosely strung together, incoherent ideas made by a schizophrenic man in a basement, because they basically were. None of it came together smoothly. Like, first you're in a maze avoiding a big fish thing after talking to the Grim Reaper, I guess, or Death. Then you're fighting the angel monsters from Evangelion, which that was just input in there for no reason. Then you're in a stereotypical hell imagery fighting weird rock monsters with the worst PvE out of any Roblox game I've ever played. Meanwhile, they would tack random non-canon stuff into the games like Virgil from Devil May Cry and a bunch of other things that weren't in Bleach just for the sake of adding cool content, but all it really did was make the game feel jarring and bad to play. Because why am I playing a Bleach game and why is Virgil from Devil May Cry dropping the Yamato for me to use? And on top of that, they tacked permadeath PvP onto it for basically no reason, because they thought it would be more engaging if Hell had permadeath PvP mechanics, and the entire quest for true modes just wasn't fun. And for a while they had testers gatekeeping it because people just, you know, are assholes, and it caused people to lose interest pretty quickly. And then the developers pretty much couldn't drop any half-decent updates in this time either. So in just 1 month and a half's time, the game was down to 2,000 players from the initial 187,000. They couldn't manage a single decent content update in over a month, and the update they did drop was outright bad. They messed up on every front. Optimization? Terrible. It was super laggy. Bugs? Well, clearly the testers weren't playing this enough, because there were bugs, flings, basically everything you can imagine, soft locks, data store issues, all of them. PvE. The game was never even meant for PvE. It fought terribly and just resulted in a poorly flowing fight with every encounter. Map design looked jarringly different from everything else, and they also started the trend of rolling back content at this point. The old Katakura Town map, which was the weird Japan one, was removed, and the older one was brought back due to the oldish one being weird and unfamiliar, and also just really poorly designed and made. But this was just the start. Eventually, Type Soul would be shut down for a third time after the Hellverse update. It would then be re-released in May of this year, being 2026, and it would drop to only 20,000 players, barely over 10% of what the Hellverse would debut to. In fact, it was about 11 to 12%, and the entire update had almost no content additions and no major content additions. In fact, the entire update only removed content from the game. The Hellverse and True modes were entirely gone, PvE boss raids were entirely gone, my inventory and accessories were entirely gone, the save states were entirely gone. I'm sorry, stupid joke. Regardless, the largest part of this update was the removal of bad content to make the game better and improve upon it by finally choosing to stick to their strengths, which was the game's PvP. Nobody was playing Type Soul for the lore, progression, or PvE, but for some reason the developers couldn't grasp this fact until it was way too late. They should have always embraced the PvP side of the game, and coherently centered their updates around it. Now, with a new release and no new content, people really only came back expecting the developers to at least, update the game now, but no major content additions have been added since, which is even worse because the game was supposed to have some sort of 1000-year Blood War update, and today the game is still sitting at just a few hundred players, and in a couple more months I see it dying again. And if I'm being completely honest, I don't see it coming back. There isn't a whole lot of content that they've been holding out on that they haven't released for some mysterious reason. The game just doesn't have a good set of creative team members to actually make ideas for the game, and because of that, every time they're releasing the game or re-releasing the game, and every time they generate hype, the game dies soon after. Nobody is hyped for a game with no updates anymore. Type Soul is just nowhere near what it used to be, and over time it only became less fun as things got more common. I know people hate exclusivity and gatekeeping, but I think the game was more fun when not every shitter in the overworld had Bankai. The game just got less captivating over time, with a terribly dysfunctional development team who wasn't capable of working on a game this big. I feel like the developers got lucky they had good combat and PvP, because without that, Type Soul is literally nothing. This game barely survived as long as it should have because they got lucky the PvP was fun. Outside of that, they were pretty incompetent with handling updates and the stuff that actually mattered, so they just let the game die continuously before shutting it down to stage a new resurrection with a mid re-release. And honestly, I think this time it's finally over. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. New song cover should have dropped yesterday. I'm actually recording this video on the same day I'm making the song cover, so it should have dropped yesterday from when you guys are watching this, so go check it out with any tier. Even the lowest tier YouTube membership can hear them, so buy any tier if you want to hear them. But shout out to my YouTube members of tier 2 or higher: Philip, Akio Sugikuni, Zerksky, Fun Guns, Crypto, Brock Lee, Delusional Mo, Dev, Suited Wendigo — I love you Suited Wendigo, he's a max tier — Drezzy Drake fan, and welcome new tier 2 member Abrowski. I love you, Abrowski, thank you for supporting, and I love you all. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.